Good afternoon. It's about 3:02, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Tom Mays. I'm the Chief Legal Officer and General Counsel at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. To all of our attendees who registered for today's webinar, Protecting the Eisenhower Executive Office Building from Irreparable Harm, thank you for your time and for your interest in this important matter. Today's presentation is going to be led by Rebecca Miller and David Scott Parker. Rebecca is the Executive Director of the DC Preservation League. The DC Preservation League is the local nonprofit organization that works to preserve, protect, and enhance the historic and built environment of Washington, D.C. through advocacy and education. And Rebecca has been instrumental in executing this mission for more than 2 decades. David is a practicing architect and principal of his own firm with broad experience in cultural institutions, preservation, restoration, and adaptive use projects. He's worked on a number of national historic landmarks, including the U.S. Treasury Department building, and is a trustee of the National Trust and a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. In a few minutes, Rebecca and David are going to share their insights on the significance of the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, as well as an architectural analysis of the harm that would be caused by painting the Eisenhower Executive Office Building based on their own extensive knowledge and opinions. We are hoping that this presentation can potentially inform any public comments to the National Capital Planning Commission. The project is scheduled to be considered by the National Capital Planning Commission at its meeting at 1 p.m. on May 7th. The deadline to submit your comments to them is noon Eastern Time on May 6th. One quick disclaimer to get out of the way. This webinar is not about the lawsuit that the DC Preservation League filed regarding the painting of the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, and we will not be addressing legal issues today. We're primarily going to be focused on the architectural impact of potentially painting the building. Also, everything included in today's webinar is the opinion of the individual speaking, and those opinions are based on what we've been able to discern from the limited plans for painting the Eisenhower Executive Office Building that have been released. After the presentation concludes, there will be another approximately 20 minutes where we'll respond to a selection of the many wonderful questions that our audience has already submitted or that you can submit during the webinar. Due to today's exceptionally large audience, we won't be taking live questions, but we would encourage questions on the Q&A panel, and I encourage you to submit them on the Q&A function. One of my colleagues is going to put links in the webinar chat to our NCPC public comment page and the publicly available Eisenhower Executive Office Building renderings. These links will also be distributed in a follow-up email to you along with a recording of the session. We also hope that the analysis in this presentation will help inform your comments to the NCPC. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca and David, beginning with Rebecca. Rebecca, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Tom. I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. The Eisenhower Executive Office Building is near and dear to my heart. I've lived in Washington for 23 years and been with the DC Preservation League that amount of time. So I've worked on and with this building a lot over the years. And it is, as I mentioned, one of my favorite buildings here in town. David's going to give you a lot of the history of the building, but what I wanted to do was really share some information from a document that I found really relevant as part of our efforts more recently for advocating for not painting this particular building and how important the Executive Office Building is to the city of Washington. Back in 1984, there was a document produced by the White House, I hope you can see it in the picture, called The Old Executive Office Building, a Victorian Masterpiece. And the foreword reads, "The nation's capital is graced by scores of magnificent monuments and imposing official structures, among them the Lincoln, Jefferson, and Washington memorials, the White House and Capitol Building. These structures attract thousands of visitors each year for two reasons. First, they are impressive architectural achievements. Second, they have great historical significance. They either commemorate great individuals or events. With this twofold standard in mind, it is time that we accord the old Executive Office Building, formerly the State, War, and Navy Building, a place in the front rank of American historical monuments. The OEOB, as it was known then, the acronym by which the old Executive Office Building is known, is almost 100 years old. So this was 1984, and of course we'll talk a little bit more about its history then. And is an architectural masterpiece. It is one of the nation's finest examples of the French Second Empire style and stands in stark contrast to the neoclassical architectural style that characterizes the majority of government buildings. The singular design of the building makes the OEOB an artistic resource that the nation should value and preserve. The OEOB has also been host to a number of important historical events. In 1898, the Secretary of State John Hay handed the Spanish ambassador his passport and credentials in room 208 that signified our declaration of war against Spain. There were other amazing different events that took place throughout its history. Surely few buildings in Washington have hosted occupants and witnessed events of such an order. It is above all this legacy of great statesmen who have performed great deeds in its confines which make the OEOB an important national resource. The preservation of the OEOB and an awareness of its value as an historical site is important for the American public and especially for those who labor in its offices today and who will do so in the future. To work in offices that have housed such eminent figures like John Hay, Charles Evans Hughes, Theodore Roosevelt, and Dwight Eisenhower should serve as an inspiration for those who work hard and honorably on the nation's behalf. It should also remind those who occupy the building that the presidency comprises far more than a single individual elected every 4 years. The presidency is, in fact, a permanent institution with a long and noble history. When each new administration moves into offices that have been occupied by dozens of past administrations, sketching back over almost a century, those individuals who work in the OEOB should be reminded of its enduring historical and architectural significance. The OEOB stands as a reminder to the public and to each new administration that America is governed not by a disconnected series of presidents, but by an enduring presidency. It is for those reasons that this administration, the Reagan administration, is making a special effort to ensure that the old Executive Office Building is preserved and that its magnificence is well maintained, and publications such as this will contribute to better understanding of the building's legacy and greater appreciation for its architectural quality. And with that is why we're so interested in it here at DCPL. And I'll turn it over to David so he can tell you more about the history of the building.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. The Eisenhower Executive Office Building, of course, is a very extremely important historic structure. It stands west of the White House, which would be left in this view, where it essentially occupies a small city block. And as you can see, has the scale of and relates to the urban fabric of Washington. Here's an aerial view with the EEOB circled in red. It mimics the footprint of the U.S. Treasury building on the other side of the White House. The White House grounds proper, between these block-like buildings, was designed by Olmsted, the preeminent American landscape firm, and has a more romantic, park-like feel. Although the EEOB is adjacent to, it is architecturally independent from the White House. Built between 1871 to 1888 to house the U.S. Departments of State, War, and Navy, the impressive edifice was designed by Alfred Mullet and remains his most important and enduring accomplishment. It should be noted that Mullet also designed the northern portion of the U.S. Treasury seen here, which was completed just 2 years before work began on EEOB. The interesting history of the EEOB begins shortly after the Civil War, and this impressive structure is notable for being symmetrical on all fronts, occupying a full city block. And in this 1879 view, you can notice the significance of its slate roof and of its rusticated granite base. There are almost 1,600 windows in this building, with over 900 stone columns and pilasters. The building's exterior walls and window frames are entirely sculpted of granite. It was begun under the administration of President Ulysses Grant, the much celebrated hero who led America through the Civil War. It was a very expensive building to construct, which upset taxpayers. Its architecture was inspired by Renaissance buildings, and especially French structures epitomized by the Louvre with its mansard roof, seen at left. Unfortunately, the considerable cost, as well as the time it took to build this building, and associations with political scandals that occurred during Grant's administration, soured the public's perception of its architecture. The Victorian architecture, however, is its distinguishing feature, and the building is regarded as one of the finest, if not the preeminent, example of French Second Empire style in America. Its designation in 1969 as a National Historic Landmark, which you can see the criteria at left, first cites its architecture for this significance, and then reiterates the importance and integrity of its well-preserved exterior with unpainted granite and slate, original slate roof and detailing. Natural materials are an inherent part of this architecture. The various tones of stone complement the original slate roof and are integral to the French Second Empire design. A large portion of the granite for EEOB came from a quarry in Vinyl Haven, Maine, which also supplied exterior stone for the Library of Congress and the old post office, which today is a hotel. Additionally, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, the New York Stock Exchange, and President Grant's tomb are all constructed of Vinyl Haven granite. You might ask, why would anyone paint this? And what impacts will that have? Granite is a natural material and needs to breathe, and is itself the exterior finish. It is analogous in many ways to skin. Hermetically sealing stone negates its ability to naturally adapt to changing moisture conditions and can cause trapped particulates, for example, ferrous metal iron ties in the granite, to rust and weep to the surface. Think of dirt in skin pores blistering as pimples. Painting over stone can cause innumerable problems. Hydrostatic pressure is the relentless force exerted by trapped water against the backside of stone from within, which can cause any coatings over it to blister, bubble, or blow off. Crystal mineralization and efflorescence are related to salts that are carried by moisture and deposited by the moisture that is then driven to the surface of the stone by capillary action, causing harm when these trapped materials inside the stone pores, where they can cause cracks, spalling, or crumbling. I would also note that it could potentially lead to biological growth, the moisture, and ongoing, previously unnecessary, expensive, never-ending maintenance. Subsequent paint removal would is almost impossible and would require harsh sandblasting. A stone facade is, as mentioned, like skin, impacted by whatever is applied to it, as well as the conditions to which it is subjected. Paint, on the other hand, is sometimes protective, but in this case is cosmetic, essentially being implied almost like makeup. It is extremely important to note that this makeup paint would need to be cleaned and scraped each time the building is repainted. Otherwise, it shortens the life of the coating. And I've illustrated this concept here as a helix that goes in this loop to loop, from paint to fade to crack to peel, scrape, repaint. It's a permanent, vicious, and extraordinary costly cycle. If the EEOB is painted, it will also need to be scaffolded and cleaned each time before it is repainted. Because of the immense size of EEOB and its complex exterior detailing, this will take many months each and every time, and the building will be scaffolded throughout that on a constant basis. Those of you who live in or frequent Washington, D.C., can recall how long the Supreme Court was covered in scaffolding and how memorable and in a not so great way that is. The National Park Service publishes a preservation brief, and their very first preservation brief in 1975 focused on the harmful effects of painting masonry and the hazards of then trying to clean it off. This technical series was initiated to provide professional guidance on preserving, rehabilitating, and restoring historic structures. And the relevance of this today continues today, 50 years later. The current application to the National Capital Planning Commission refers to this project as, and I quote, Eisenhower Executive Office Building Exterior Beautification Project. The submission includes comparative elevations, as shown here, but does not include comparative photos or renderings. Renderings submitted by the administration depict the building painted white, but without, as I noted, a companion as-is image. Here is a composite image that has been done to approximate the submitted view while depicting the existing stone exterior and original russet slate roof. As all architects and designers know, white colors stand out while darker tonalities recede. Painting the Eisenhower Executive Office Building white will cause it to compete with the White House. This is a composite comparative view of EEOB, in which the photo of EEOB as it exists now has been added to give an idea of existing condition. Compare this composite photo with the proposed view provided by the applicant as part of the current submission to NCPC. Compare it and ask yourselves, is it better for EEOB to retain its original landmark integrity and receding tonalities, or to match and, I would suggest, overwhelm the historic White House? Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Rebecca. And thanks to the team for putting up the public comment deadline. We'll come back to that. We do have a number of very good questions that were submitted in advance. I'm going to try to go through some of those in a kind of logical order, thinking about why somebody might want to paint the old executive office building to begin with. So Let me begin with first a basic question. Is the building clad in granite or is the granite structural? And is the stone ashlar in good condition?
Thank you for that question. The building is the stone is structural, and it is ashlar. Um, and was there another part of that question, Tom?
Well, it's really, is it in good condition?
The granite is in good condition. It's if you look at the photos that were submitted as part of the submission, there are a few places, doesn't look like very many, where granite is chipped, but in general, it is in very good condition. Granite and the granite exterior should be cleaned, but that's not something that is done that frequently, and is really aesthetic.
In general, this is a follow-up question. In general, I think of granite as holding up very well as an exterior material and not needing a great deal of care. Is that how you think of it, either of you?
Absolutely. As an exterior building material, it really is superior for its ability to act as a skin for a structure and it was intended and is best preserved left in its natural state.
Great. Thank you,
I would agree
Rebecca.
with that, Tom. And I think one of the things you'll see around Washington is some of the highest profile buildings are built with granite. So when we were talking about, especially the latter part of the 19th century, the buildings that were being developed, such as the Library of Congress and the old post office, which were, major government undertakings, and seeing the value of that resource.
Great. Thank you. Is it fair to say that the use of granite connotes kind of stability and permanence?
And power.
Yeah.
All
Great.
of
Yes.
the above, yes.
Hmm.
Good. So that leads to the next question, which is if you don't paint it, what can you do to make it look better?
Clean it, which I would note, the you cannot paint a building unless you clean it. So the I would advocate for cleaning the building and bringing it back to its original luster.
I'd also say one of the things that we've described a lot is the lighting of a building is very important. So if you have various lumens that are that are lighting the building that aren't consistent, it can make the building look less desirable, I should say. So, really kind of lighting the building properly can really enhance how the building looks at certain times of the day as well.
That's great. Thank you. And then the next logical question, how can granite be cleaned and preserved?
Whenever a stone building is cleaned, they usually do testing in various areas to find the most gentle way of cleaning it that does no harm to the substrate. Granite is a durable material if left alone. And the problem if it is painted is that the paint, by the way, goes into the pores and it's virtually impossible to get that out. But the what I would also point to is the preservation brief number one that was shown as part of this presentation, which discusses proper cleaning techniques for stone and exists as a resource for all Americans to go to online.
Great.
And
Thank you.
one of the things I think that
Good.
David mentioned was that we try and dissuade people from painting these types of things because of the maintenance that's involved in it. And if somebody thinks about a row house in Washington, that's a masonry row house that's been painted, and kind of the upkeep that you need to have on that particular building every several years. And how often do you think we would have to repaint this, David?
The it Various sources talk about or suggest repainting large institutional commercial buildings that are painted on the exterior every 5 to 7 years. I would think that at least every 10 years it would need to be painted. So, and when you consider how long it would take to first clean it each time, and then once you've cleaned it, then to paint it, and how long the scaffolding will be up. This is not inconsequential either in terms of time or money, and it becomes like that helical cycle that I showed in the PowerPoint.
Mhm.
Just to follow up on that, if you don't do it regularly, what does it start to look like? If you're not constantly painting it and it goes beyond the 7 to 10 year cycle.
Well, as we all know, not, uh, uh, dirt or uh, flaking or peeling shows much, much more on a surface that is white. So it will look bad it will look bad quickly, and the paint, because even though there are those who say that there are more permeable paints, any coating on a granite surface, because granite is the intended and proper exterior skin of the building. Any coating uh, is harmful, and any coating that's applied is difficult to get off, and even more difficult if it's one of these so-called more permeable coatings.
So David, you covered this a little bit, but I just want to come back to this fundamental preservation issue with painting stone buildings and perhaps ask you to reiterate and even expand on, if you can, um, how does painting a granite building like that damage it and damage it irreparably?
Painting it fills the pores, and it creates a coating that moisture will get behind, and it serves to trap the moisture inside, and it retains the dampness, which then creates a multitude of other problems. One of when the moisture travels in, it can have salts in it, which are then, when as it begins to dry out, deposits and then leaches out. And at the same time, the moisture that is sealed within causes any ferrous materials like iron to rust, and that can cause what's known as rust jacking, which then can cause the stone itself and any cracks in it to get worse. And so it's a problem that it entombs moisture, and it conceals problems, so that those problems, when when they become apparent, are much, much worse and much, much more difficult to resolve. And as I noted, can also cause biological growth, and in the most extreme cases, cause mold as well. Tom, I cannot
Oh,
hear
Tom, I
you.
think you're muted. Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long, involved
I was like,
question.
where
I
at the
had
top
not
we lose
muted
Tom?
myself. So thank you. At the CFA hearing, there was a lot of discussion about paint and whether there are breathable paints that allow the stone to be to not have moisture trapped in it. I just wondered if you would share your thoughts about what you know about existing paints on the market and the idea of using some of those paints on stone. And that's a question for both of you.
Any
Dave, do you want to
coating,
start?
yeah, sure. Any coating fills the pores, even ones that are considered more breathable. And then in filling the pores, it becomes virtually impossible to get that off later, and can create other problems down the road. And so the 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 essential point is the building was designed to have a granite exterior, and the granite is really very well suited to the climate and to the freeze thaw condition and to the ability um, to shed moisture naturally. Anything you put on the surface will, to varying extents, but in to given the cracks and crevices on this building, to a large extent, create problems down the road.
And when we were talking earlier, I was equating some of this to if you just equating it to say like a trim in your home that was painted, say white. And of course, we're talking about wood in that instance, but because we're talking about the pores that the paint could get into, or any of the creases or crevices, it's very difficult to get that out without, for instance, of wood, where you would take it to go get dipped, for instance. This is not what you can do with a building of this size. You can't take some of the granite off and go and have it dipped. So it's a much more complex process to have this done on a building of this size.
Yeah, in my opinion, and it would be interesting to see what the estimates are. But in my opinion, it would be tens of millions of dollars to try to remove the paint, and and trying to remove the paint would undoubtedly involve sandblasting, which would further damage the stone. So painting it does constitute irreparable harm, and on top of that, because the granite is itself a very sturdy skin to the building, that doesn't need much maintenance. Uh, but once you paint it, it needs a lot of maintenance. So this painting it will add to the ongoing maintenance costs of this building exponentially.
Great, thank you. I'm going to turn now to some of the questions that have been coming in, and here's a good one. Is the current color of the building attributable to the natural color of the stone, i.e., not attributable to some previous paint color?
The building has never been painted, and I'm not. I don't know when the last time was that it was cleaned. There are at least two different tonalities of granite on the building, and it the colors of the granite were very much a part of the original design conception, as was the and intended to complement the russet slate on the mansard roof, which is original.
Great, thank you. There's also a question about if there are existing chips on the building, is there a way to repair some of the damage that might exist on the building now? I think the damage, as I understand it, is actually relatively modest. But if there is some damage, what's the process for repairing damaged granite?
It can be repaired, and it's really done on a localized basis. The From the photos that I saw in the submission packet, it showed one chipped piece near the steps in one place, and the chip was maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches. And then there was it showed staining in one other picture. But from the photos that were submitted, any damage is almost inconsequential, relative to the size and scale of the facades on this building.
Well, and I would also say, Tom, that This building has been well cared for by the General Services Administration. As I read from that forward, it was a building that was acknowledged decades ago as being a very important resource to the city of Washington and to the federal government. And so there have been, you know, general service, public building commissioners and everybody who have really made efforts to make sure that this building has this long life, is maintained. It went through a major renovation as well. And it's important to note that, past administrations have in fact cared for this building. So the concerns of the current administration seem to be purely cosmetic and not material wise that it's failing in some capacity.
And I recall that when the exterior rehabilitation was done, it was also celebrated a great deal by everyone, including by preservationists. Is it fair to say that this aesthetic choice is also inconsistent with the historic significance of the building?
There's no question about that, Tom. It is an enormous violation of the preservation practice, but also of the and it violates the basis on which this building was made a National Historic Landmark. And National Historic Landmarks, and they are rare. I mean, there are perhaps only 2,800 in the entire United States. And the fact that the architecture and the integrity of the exterior of I mean, how many buildings are all of us aware of that have been preserved, where their exteriors have been preserved in almost intact without changes to the present day? And this building is 150 years old. It's quite remarkable. And the material, the exterior material, is an integral part of its architectural design.
Right. Thank you, Rebecca. Anything you would add to that?
Well, I would say that there have been arguments that have been made that, that Harry Truman thought it was the ugliest building he'd ever seen, and it was reviled when it was first built. And surely, Victorian architecture went out of style for a long time, and the rise of modernism and tastes change, and that's fine. But we all have to recognize that this is part of our history. It's our collective history as we're going from it. We're celebrating our 250th anniversary this year, and it's the collection of this development and its influences from the world that we see across our country that are important. It's not just saying, well, Harry Truman thought it was ugly, so therefore we should be able to paint it. That's not really the point of it, because we have to celebrate the different architectural styles. And yes, there are some buildings that sometimes there's like, okay, we don't need to keep that building because we have 8,000 of the others. But this particular example is arguably the best, if not one of the best examples in the United States.
Great. Thank you. We've got a comment that I think came in from our trustee, Bill Bates, which I really like. He says, for the general public's understanding, it might be worth asking them if anyone would paint the granite countertops in their kitchen. Granite is a very durable stone. And that makes a really good point. There are a couple
You have
other
to watch out for the red wine stains, then.
That's true. That's why you don't choose marble.
Yes, yeah.
There's a question, are there any precedents for this treatment, any other government buildings with granite exterior that are painted? I couldn't think of any off the top of my head. We had this discussion in the pre-meeting, as I recall.
I searched high and low trying to find an example of a granite institutional building that had been painted, and I couldn't find it. And it's because, in the case of institutional buildings, there is usually there are committees that refer to something like the preservation brief and realize that all the problems there would be if you paint the building and then decide against it. So Tom, I honestly don't know of any granite institutional buildings, and certainly none of this scale, that have ever been painted.
Rebecca, you have any thoughts?
I had a hard time thinking of one myself when we were talking about looking for a photo of what it looks like when the paint starts to peel. And I was, finding, mostly buildings that are not stone. They're, masonry in the sense of the brick. So, but I mean, similar things happen to brick buildings as well. So when the paint is not maintained.
Good.
Mhm.
So there are a couple questions around the fact that the White House is itself a sandstone building that has obviously been painted since the War of 1812, since it was repaired after the burning. And there were a couple questions about, does it have some of the same problems? What has been the treatment of it over the years? And if you all know the answers to those questions, feel free to weigh in. I'm aware that the White House, as I understand it, went through a very careful restoration where all of the paint was removed so that the original detail of the stone would again be revealed. And I believe there's information on the White House Historical Association website that suggests how long that took, and it took a long time and was very expensive and difficult to do. And is that you all's understanding? Anything you would add to that?
Well, I think the White House is made of Seneca stone, I think, isn't it, Tom? And which I
It's
believe,
actually, I think, a Quiet Creek sandstone.
well, it's a sandstone, but a sandstone is a sedimentary stone, which is much more, um, which is not as sturdy as granite, and so it presents different problems. But the the White House is probably the best example of a building that was painted, but it not being granite, it's a totally different can of worms when you look at that. Mhm.
And the same
Yeah,
principles
and
from
like
the,
the U.S. Capitol East Front, like that's also a quiet stone.
Mhm.
So,
but again, the same principles from the preservation brief would still apply.
correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so there's a question about how much would it cost to clean? How much would it cost to paint? Do we know any of those answers?
We don't have those answers, but I mean, millions and millions and millions of dollars. And you just have to think about um, the scaffolding required for a building of that size would be exceptional. We don't have a number estimate at this point. We understand that the White House has been getting estimates for painting it. We don't know what those are at this point, but it's 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 the cost to the taxpayer, not only to scaffold, paint. While you're up there, you're going to be doing repairs, but then you're also going to be doing this constantly every 7 to 10 years. The building will be scaffolded. So it's a long-term commitment if this building is painted, that it will have to continually cost the taxpayers money to do this every administration, essentially. And given how Congress doesn't necessarily fund building projects because the backlog of maintenance at our federal buildings is extensive, that you cannot guarantee that this building is going to get painted every 7 to 10 years. When you see, I'm sure the registrants have seen in the news about why they're disposing of a lot of these buildings and the backlog in maintenance and all the work that needs to take place in a lot of these. It's because they're not funded. And that's the same with our national parks. So to have this idea that we'll paint it and we're going to maintain it is it's fairly ludicrous to me. So
When you already have a surface that's extremely durable that doesn't need this level of maintenance.
correct.
No, it doesn't. And the whatever it would cost to paint it, the because you have to clean it before you paint it, the building will look as originally intended for less than what it would cost to then coat it with paint, and the problems that creates down the road are exponential. It's hard to even begin to guesstimate, how many tens of millions that might be, in my opinion.
Well, that your comment's a little bit similar to one of the questions we got, which is could they just clean it and then see if it needs to be painted? And the cleaning would reveal the original color even more.
I mean, cleaning and lighting. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and lighting. And Rebecca, I agree with you. I don't know what the exterior lighting on it is now, but lighting technology in the age of LED and color temperature is so important to how a building looks at night. And so that's something that should be considered.
Hmm. And if you walk by EEOB at night these days, there's multiple different colors of
Mhm.
lights. So it's not consistent, which I think can also be um, detrimental to a building. When you're lighting a building, you need to make sure that it's consistent so that especially if you're trying to highlight certain elements of it, especially in this capacity with a building that's this spectacular.
It is a spectacular building. Here are a couple more questions, and if you don't feel like you know the answer, don't hesitate to say so. But would you expect paint blistering failure to begin soon, given that moisture now in the stone would be trapped?
I it's hard for me to opine on that, and I would refer that to a building materials conservator. That question. Hmm.
Good. Um, let's see some of these other questions. Um, Uh, if and when clean, could there be a sealant applied rather than painting it white?
Well, there's really no reason to put a sealant on the granite because the granite, as as I noted, is a superlative exterior skin for a building, and any sealant that you put on it, it creates the potential problem of trapping moisture.
Good, thank you. And this one refers back to your an earlier part of your presentation, David. There was a reference to tonality in terms of the differing colors of the granite.
Mhm.
Could you share how those different colors played a role in the overall original design?
Mm. That well, the base, the rusticated base of the building, and I think balustrades are a slightly creamier tone, as I recall, and then the uh, flat surfaces are a granite that I think came from a quarry near Richmond, and those are more gray in tone. And the this period when this was built. And this building does fall under the umbrella of Victorian era when buildings were not white. And so a building of this architectural style never originally would have been white. So these tonalities were intended to really articulate the architectural detailing of the building. Another thing that I would note, by the way, because I mentioned that the building has, what is it, like 900 columns and pilasters and something like 1,600 windows. If you look at the cornices and entablatures on this building with their very detailed triglyphs and metopes, there are probably hundreds of thousands of those. Imagine painting all of that getting painted, and then trying to get your surgical tools up to try to get the paint out of all those cracks and crevices and all of those triglyphs and metopes. It's I can't even begin to conceive how much work that would be.
Yes, I can't even imagine. This is a quite different question. And I would look to both of you, but I'll start with Rebecca. There was a question about why people outside of DC should care about this.
Uh, well, it's a federal building and it's part of our collective history. And the people own this building, the citizens of the United States. And it's not just a building that is for Washingtonians. We have millions and millions of visitors every year who come to Washington to see the seat of government, to see these buildings. The interior of the building's phenomenal as well, if you're able to ever take a tour of it. So the more we can have people from across the country interested in these sites, um, the more likely we are to protect buildings like this. I always, I remember when I first moved to Washington, people were surprised that I lived outside of Baltimore when I was a kid, but I lived on the West Coast and moved back after college to work at DCPL. And people are like, well, why do you care about DC? I'm like, because I do. I mean, where else to do historic preservation, but also just because you don't live here doesn't mean you shouldn't care about it. Because what the federal government does here can affect what happens in your own city or town as well. So allowing this to happen here could mean that your courthouse, your post office, your federal buildings, they could use this as justification to do it in your city or your town. And so what happens here really influences the rest of the country, and that's why people across America should really be concerned about this.
I want to echo that, Rebecca, because what happens here can unfortunately mean it can happen all over. And if something like this, which creates exponential problems and costs for this building, gets amplified across the country with other buildings, I can't even begin to imagine. The attention really needs to be brought to this, and the importance of preservation, not just because of architectural integrity, but because of economics and expense. For every reason that we've gone over, this building should not be painted.
Right. Thank you. We're just about out of time. I would say what I think I've heard from you all today is one, the exterior stone of this building was part of the original design of the building. Two, it contributes to the significance of the building as a National Historic Landmark. Three, painting it is not only unnecessary, it will damage the building and damage the stone. I've sort of lost my count. I think I'm at four. Four, it will be expensive, costly, time-consuming, and difficult to maintain the paint once it goes on. And five, if they make the decision to remove the paint, it will be almost impossible to do. Is that a fair summation?
And I would add one other thing, Tom, and that is that the building, it's a big building. And because the tonality of it, which was intended by the original architect, it recedes and does not compete with the White House. Painting it to match the White House will, because it's larger, will make it, and this is my opinion, overwhelm the White House. So it's not it's a bad idea financially, it's a bad idea technically, and it's also not a good idea in terms of aesthetics um, and 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 really trying to protect the White House itself from encroachment.
Thank you, David. Rebecca, any final additions to that?
No, I think you all have covered them. It's just it seems to me like a colossal waste of taxpayer funds. And when we think about the millions and millions of dollars that this could cost and the time and energy that everybody's spending on this, um, which is just practically speaking not something that should move forward. There's a lot of I have a million things that we could spend this money on in DC. A million landmarks in DC we could fix up. So
Well, thank you. Thank you both for this. If we could pull up the slide that talks about how we can comment for NCPC, I would appreciate it. And just remind everybody to please take a look at the links that were shared as a part of the webinar and on our website. And please go to the NCPC website and comment on this if you have thoughts about it as a result of this webinar. And then I simply want to thank David and Rebecca for their time and thoughts in preparing for this and sharing this information with everyone. And Rebecca, thank you in particular for joining us from DCPL. We appreciate all the work that you all do.
Thank you for having us.
And here's the information. Thank you all. And finally, thanks to all the participants for being with us this afternoon. And as indicated, the recording will be available and will be sent to everyone who signed up. So thank you all and good afternoon.